We'll get started with the workshop for today. So today we're going to be talking about building an MVP and like specifically detailing what an MVP is in case you don't know what it is, why it's important to build an MVP, and then also like the steps and strategies to do so. I think you all should have already checked in before coming in, but in case you haven't already, the check-in code is build MVP, and you could check in at acmucsd.com. Also, as a heads up, for ACM Innovate, we do have board applications available, and I think they close like next week or like towards the end of the month. So if you want to apply, definitely apply at acm or acmurl.com/apply-innovate. Everything you need for that will be there. And then it's also like being posted in our Discord if you're part of it. And if you want to join the Discord, there's a link available. I can give it to you at the end of the presentation. So what is an MVP? So an MVP stands for minimum viable product. And to sort of break that down, an MVP contains the essence of a final product in its simplest form. So the concept of like an MVP and building an MVP was created by like startup founders that wanted a way to sort of introduce their product or service into the market without having to do like that much work and to just see like how the market would react to it. So it's a very like fundamental, simple, and like bare bones version of like the final thing that you're trying to create. But you release that really early on just to see how people would interact. And then now when you're trying to build like your final thing, you have all of that like valuable like information and feedback in mind. Um, so a minimum viable product or MVP is again like simple. It should be really the essential features that that final product or service that you're trying to build should have. And then at the same time, it should also be like practical. So even though it's like a very like small and like fundamental version, it should still be practical and useful for like your customers because it should still represent the like ultimate like goal that you have, like the ultimate like product or service. So it should still be useful, but again, just like the bare minimum that you need. And then lastly, again, like I've been reiterating this, it should be unfinished. You shouldn't have, all of the grand like features and things that you want to implement already with it. It should just be the bare minimum so you can see how people react to it. And kind of going off of that, why people build MVPs, again, the main thing is to see what works and what doesn't. That was the goal when like people started creating MVPs, and that's like the strategies and background for why people still do so today. And that main thing that you're getting is fast and informative feedback. If a lot of startups like have big goals of trying to create whatever they're trying to create, like whatever product or service they wanted in the future, and they put in a lot of like money and energy into trying to build that product, but then they release it and nobody uses it, or it doesn't work as expected, or they're missing certain things. And that's what an MVP tries to eliminate. That's why that fast informative feedback that you get from the start, from like the early stages of the startup, allows you to then build something that people actually want in the future. With an MVP, the main thing that you're looking for is you're trying to release a product as quickly as possible. As long as you push something out for people to then like interact with, and that's like the main goal that you should have, because you can see how the market actually sort of like reacts to that product or service, and you get to see what they actually want, because what like founders and startups have in their minds about like what people want, it's obviously very different than what the market actually wants. So pushing out your product as fast as possible is one of the main reasons people want to build MVPs. And then I kind of touched on this already, but another thing is like reflecting on the company and the market. Once you get that informative feedback, you're then able to like reflect on like the structure of your company, how you're doing things, and then also the product or service, like the different things that you need to change with that. You might realize that you like that product or service that you're trying to build isn't really needed in the market, or you might realize that certain features that you have available might not be useful. So there's a lot of reflection that happens after building an MVP, and that's sort of the like feedback loop that you get, as you can see on screen. Like after building it, you then measure and get that feedback, and in the end, you learn from it, which is the main reason why you'd want to build one. In this graphic here, you can kind of see they did research and found like the top 5 reasons tech startups fail. And as you can see, the first one is no market need. So people didn't need that product or service. And the second one is ran out of money. So obviously the startup just didn't have enough resources to keep it going. And those two like big reasons are the main reasons why like an MVP is important and a main reason why like MVPs were created in the first place. If you create an MVP, you get to measure whether a market actually needs your product because once you push it out there, you then get that feedback and interaction. And then also, if you make an MVP, it's pretty cost efficient since you're doing something that doesn't require a lot of work in like a short period of time. So you don't end up like going through all of your funds like from the beginning, and you're able to save your money and use it like efficiently in the future. To sort of help like you all understand like what an MVP is, I want to go over like some like real world examples. The first one being Airbnb. So if you don't know what Airbnb is, it's like an online marketplace for lodging and tourism activities. Um, the idea of it is like if you have like an extra room that you want to earn some extra cash for, you can rent it out on Airbnb. And then if someone is like visiting or there's like tourists or whatever, or if they need just like a place to stay, they can book that extra room that you have on Airbnb and then stay there. So the founders of Airbnb, the reason why they created it was they noticed a problem. And the problem that they had was, for one, they actually lived together, the two founders, and they had an extra space in their living room that just they didn't know what to do with, and they thought that they could start earning money by renting it out. And they also noticed that in the city that they lived in, there were a lot of like tech conferences that happened. And the thing with tech conferences is they often happen in like a short span of time, like for the weekend or something. And when there's a lot of people flooding into your city in that short period of time, they notice that it's hard for these tech conference attendees to then get like a place to stay. Hotels end up increasing their rates. They end up getting fully booked. And it's just hard in general for the city didn't make it really too easy for people to get a booking. So with these two problems in hand, they thought that they could then rent out that extra space that they had in their living room, but then also create a service for it and see if other people would end up using it and if it was just like a need in the market in general. So they tested this out by having people rent out that space in their living room and then like posting about it online and creating a website. And again, they targeted tech conference attendees, but as we know today, like everyone uses Airbnb, it's not just for attendees. And as you can see in this slide, like this is like really early version of like the Airbnb website. Like as you see, the name for it was Air Bed and Breakfast, which is what Airbnb stands for. And some essential features that they're not really too essential, but like some features that are pretty important that they didn't have in the beginning because they were just trying to push something out and get people to interact with it was a map view. There's no map view, which is something that's pretty important today that a lot of people use when they're trying to book like rentals or anything online. They didn't even have a payment system like on their website. They just, since they were renting out their own living room and they were controlling everything, they just asked for cash. And that sort of process that they went through was, again, like the bare minimum that they needed to get feedback. Since they were the ones renting out their space, they weren't waiting on someone else to rent out their living room. They were the ones like in control of that. Then they can control like all the aspects of it and truly see whether or not people were going to take advantage of a service like that. And as we know today, people do need a service like that, and they were successful, but that's how they started out. Another example I wanted to talk about is Twitch. So if you don't know what Twitch is, it's like an online live streaming platform. And Twitch started out, it didn't start out like the way it is now. It started out as Justin.tv, which was a website where the founder, Justin Khan, he would just live stream his life, like everything he did. It was like a 24/7 stream. So he just live streamed his daily life. And the two main features that they wanted in that website for Justin to stream was, for one, like his video, like showing what he's doing. And then another important feature that hadn't really been done at that time was a live chat. So people can comment and like talk to Justin as he's like walking around or doing his everyday activities, and then he can interact with them as well. So those are the two main features that Twitch had in the beginning when it was just live streaming Justin. And eventually, after they put out that MVP and people started interacting with him and interacting with that service that they provided, they allowed like select other people to start live streaming. They didn't push it out to the public where like anyone could sign up yet, but they allowed like other like people creating content to start live streaming. And then now today, anyone can create an account, start live streaming, and live stream whatever they want. So this was the first like initial website for Justin.tv. If you use Twitch today, it's obviously very different. There's so much happening compared to what's happening here. But as I was talking about, we really only have like the essential features here, which is the live stream of Justin, and then also the live chat feed. And one thing that I thought was interesting was when they created Justin.tv and pushed it out to the public, they did not really focus on video games. When I first heard about like Twitch, it was because of video games, because like people playing video games would live stream what they're doing, but that wasn't the main like focus or goal from the beginning. The beginning was like a live stream platform that people can talk and like chat on. And again, like I really want to stress how like bare bones and like small their first like MVP was. I think if you see in this photo, like Justin's wearing a hat, has like a camera taped to it, and then when he would walk around, they'd have like a laptop rig that he'd carry. So everything they were doing was like pretty cheap and pretty small, but as we know today, Twitch got bought by I think Amazon, and just everything took off when they started developing their product. So now that I've talked about like what an MVP is and some real world examples, I want to go into an activity so we could all interact. Like this is the first Innovate in-person like workshop, so we could talk. And for this activity, I wanted you all to think about an MVP model for a product or service. So on the next slide, I have like a list of like products or services. But if you want to like, if you have like one in mind that you're thinking of, or if you want to like create your own, feel free to do so. But just brainstorm the essential features that like your product or service would need, and then how customers would interact with it. So for example, like Twitch, their essential features were video streaming, and then ways for customers to interact with that video stream, and the ways that customers interact with it, they thought of adding a live chat feature. And then also start thinking about like how these essential features would grow. As I've been talking about, an MVP starts out small, but eventually you're going to start adding things and develop it into the final product that you're trying to reach. Here are a list of ideas like from the internet of like products, services, industries. But don't be limited to that. I literally just Googled like top tech startup ideas. So just take a look at that. And if you want to start thinking about like an MVP, and we'll take like 5 minutes to think and like talk about it. And feel free to just talk to those around you, introduce yourself, get to know some people in ACM Innovate, and exchange your ideas. So yeah. I'll also go out and talk to you all. Do I want to share it? All right. Let me think. All right. All right. We can all brainstorm together. Yeah, definitely. I don't know, like a spice. Spice. That is really good. Wait, that actually. I'm sure something like that exists. I'm sure. No, it's yeah, it has like. They have like Hello Fresh. Yeah. It's like a medium for like places to style. Because the thing about it, like, people that are cooking and stuff, a lot of the spices are really into that stuff. They want like a wide range of spices. So they're like a subscription service. Like that. So it's really that's a pretty big MVP. I mean, it doesn't have to be because like, they just show up to something. You could no, actually, like, you could start off with like a neighborhood. Like you go into your neighborhood, like there's something like that. Right? Like
What if you just centralize it where anyone can submit and have artists with X, Y, and Z, where you know, pay a certain amount of money, to do, and people will make designs, and then they like one, and then it's going to be back to the mass. It's basically like it's like sell like it's like you're basically that's why you can have like when you have growth, the thing about how people just pitch like multiple designers working on different designs. Yeah. And there's like tender for that, and there's no way to be like that is that yeah, that like it just toss out anything. People like I'm saying like you're cooking something more like yeah, like if you think about food, like one person it's hard to look small. I don't kind of eat I mean, that would be like your quality will vary. You only get the one person image. You don't have all the computers. In this case, you pay a small amount of money. You don't have to use art vendor. You have three different like art vendors. When they can do that, and then they can art like easy or not that the very least you get money just off the base stuff. At least they have to invest a little bit to get the yeah, basically you saw efficiency of design. So you can both be efficient about it. Yeah, be efficient about it. Also, it basically would save the person's time. Yeah, you don't have either person to draw it. Time finding it, yeah, actually like or like alternatively, you should have it on the other side, so you're providing the artisan side on the other side, artisan side up, and then you pass it along like a job. Then like some person can already yeah. And because the benefit would be that you can get something made relatively fast, and you would be able to do so without having to like search for the content. I think we're a little high. That's not a startup. That's a local company. This is a real product. I don't see the legit, but I mean more like business design. The TV is on. It's a startup. Yeah, more or less. Except the idea would be go through, have an idea for design. So, hey, here's an artist who has run a design, and you can take that and you take that artist and make it back down. Yeah, I think it's an efficient process. Basically, creating a website where the artist can sign up. The lack of availability too. What? There's a lack of options. Yeah, there's no option. Someone who can design website and that the real coding algorithm here would be trying to efficiently find someone who match, like find an artist match to like someone who is this little spice of things? I was like, wow, you guys are going really in on this idea. I ran with decentralized digital marketing. I totally wow, I actually don't know. I guess it's basically just, hey, how do you have people make design and art for you?
Yeah, and like putting it all in one place. That was good. We had some great ideas. Spice subscription service and go ahead, your like 5 ideas. But moving on, now we're going to talk. Now that we talked about like what an MVP is, why it's important, examples of it. The next big thing is how to actually build an MVP and sort of like the steps you'll take to get there. So some general tips and info that I kind of stressed in the beginning too is you should be able to build it fast. Like pushing out your product as soon as possible is like the main focus that you should have when you're building it, when you're planning it, when you're talking to users. So at that same time, it should have like extremely limited functionality. You need to condense what your initials need to like a super small list of needs. And again, I can't reiterate this enough, but launching quickly is the main thing. Like no matter how simple and small your website, app, product, service is, as long as you release it as soon as possible and get people interacting with it, that's like the main goal, and that's the big thing that you want to do. So the first step that you can take when building that MVP is making a plan. So sort of like what we did earlier with our Spice subscription service and our different ideas is you want to build like a list of things that you need for that product. And obviously you're going to do that in a longer period of time than those 5 minutes we took. And you're going to write it down and you're going to make sure that that list stays in your mind throughout the whole process. So really you have to take a lot of like time to self-reflect and think about what you need and how you're going to get there. The main question you should be asking yourself is, what is my problem? How am I going to solve it? And yeah, that's what you're going to do at the beginning. And then lastly, you're going to want to time box your spec. So your spec is that list of like essential features I was talking about that you need. And by time boxing it, I mean like putting a limit to how long certain things will take. So if you're creating a website and you need designs, well, you have to say from the beginning, designs will only take 1 week, or it'll take 2 weeks, and then this feature will take 3 weeks. And in the end, it'll all take like a month and a half. Because if you don't set a schedule aside and sort of like limit yourself to what you're going to do in what period of time, then when you're actually building it, you're going to lose track of time and not build it, and that you're not going to be able to launch quickly. So once you've made that plan, the next step is obviously to then build it. And with an MVP, it should be low code. It should be like super bare bones and minimal. And you need to be efficient when building it. So don't try to implement features that will take too much time, nothing too complex. As we saw with the examples earlier, that Justin.tv website was pretty ugly and didn't have a lot going on for it, but it was the bare minimum and people were still able to use it. Again, I want to stress like stay focused. That's a common theme here. A lot of startups, when they're creating their MVPs, tend to lose sight of what they're trying to create. You know, you add one feature that you wrote down in your list, and then that makes you think of another feature that you think people need. And then next thing you know, you're wasting time on features that you didn't set aside from the beginning. So that's why that like first step of planning everything out is so important, because once you create that list and you abide by it, then you'll never lose like track of what you're actually trying to do. The next step is get customers. And I know this sounds like kind of silly, but you need like anyone, just like anyone interacting with your product or service is good. So just get anyone to interact with it and analyze everything that they're doing. Look at the like impressions, the interactions, and the engagement that you're having with your product and like whatever marketing you're doing. And just getting people to use your product is the only way that your MVP will be successful. You don't want to release something and no one ends up using it, and then you're just doomed from the beginning, because then who will ever use it? So getting people to start using the MVP and seeing how they interact with it is how that whole process goes. Once you get people using it, you need to start talking to your users and getting a feel for what they like, what they don't like, kind of like what we talked about in the beginning. Any feedback is important, and make sure to be flexible. A lot of startups will have some big idea of how they want their product or service to look. And if a customer or a person says, oh, I actually really don't like this one thing, then don't take that personally, be flexible, because at the end of the day, even though you might love that idea you have in your head, if customers don't love it, then there's really no use for it, right? So you need to constantly be asking yourself and be asking the customers, does it solve the problem? Is this something that you would use? Is it something that you would want? So you really have to listen to the customers here. Once you've built it, once you've got people interacting with it, and now they're giving you feedback, then this is the time for you to start iterating and adapting. So this is where you start improving on your solution, start implementing features that people were asking about, or maybe even start taking things out that you didn't need from the start. And you shouldn't really get this confused with like pivoting. You shouldn't try to change up everything from the start, because what likely happens is if you identify a problem and you try to find a solution for it, that problem still exists. Your solution could be, not the optimal solution, or you could be doing something wrong, but that problem probably still exists. So don't try to pivot away from it. Just start iterating and adapting based off what people say. And also like cutting your spec is just like cutting down on anything that you don't need. And this is like a cool graphic I found of just ways to measure success after building an MVP. It goes in depth, but like the main thing here is looking at like impressions. So like how many people are actually using it, interaction, if people are actually like for Justin.tv, or people are actually like chatting and commenting, and then engagement, if people are creating their own like Twitch accounts, or if people are starting to rent out their own rooms on Airbnb or whatever. So yeah, those are like this is what you look at after the whole fact. Some tools and techniques to help you get there. So like software side, a lot of what you're going to be doing is like, well, especially if your product is like a website or an app, a lot of what you're going to be doing is design focused, because the core like way that people will use your product will stay the same, but then the designs and how things will look and how people will interact with it will change. So these are like some websites and like resources that you can use. And one of them, which is Figma, I'll go on to, and like the rest of the presentation will really focus on Figma. Figma is like a really helpful design resource that like everyone uses. And after you use Figma, then you start like implementing it in code and stuff. So these are some resources that I want to list out. And the main thing here that you use these resources for is like prototyping, just like planning out how certain things will look and seeing how like people will interact with it. And then based off that, you can start actually building it and going further in the development process. All right, so now that leads me to building an MVP using Figma. So just like, do you guys know what Figma is? Any of you guys know? Yeah, oh, okay. All right, cool. So Figma is a vector graphics editing tool with prototyping tools built in. So it's really handy because when you use Figma, it's kind of like a Google Doc where like everyone can like hop online and collaborate, but instead of like creating a document, you're creating like the designs for like a website or like an app. So it's commonly used to design wireframes and user flows for your like MVP for like whatever service you're trying to create. And like compared to whatever's already out there, so like Photoshop or other design resources, Figma lets you collaborate in real time, like I was saying, and then it also lets you send prototypes that you can share. And it's just a good jumping off point to code when you're actually trying to like build it and develop it. And then it also lets you understand user flows quickly. So like I was talking about earlier about like trying to plan everything out, Figma's a good place to start off there. So with like Figma, you can wireframe, so you easily plan out your flow. So if you have like a website for our Spice subscription, then obviously your flow is going to start off with a home page for you to sign in, or a home page that has a list of all the spices or something like that. And then based off that, they go to this next screen where they're able to select which spices they're trying to get for the month or whatever. So it's easy for you to plan out everything. It's easy for you to wireframe using Figma. And when you wireframe, you don't really worry about like aesthetics. Like you're not worried about like the specific like font and colors of certain things. You're kind of planning out like the different like boxes and things that like people will interact with on your website or app. Some tips when you're like wireframing and building like an MVP using Figma, hand draw things first, unless like you're a natural, and you could just build it from scratch from the start. Hand drawing things will be easy because it'll get you like a general idea of how you want things to look. And then focus on the flow before the UI. So UI stands for user interface, UX stands for user experience. So focus on user experience first, how people will interact with, or how people will like do certain things on your like app or website, and then later worry about like the aesthetics of it. And again, think about like what is the problem I want to solve and draw out that flow first. And then I'm gonna like play a video in a bit that we have from like last year that kind of explains some basics of Figma, and it'll be like a kind of like quick demo about like how you can build an app or website on Figma. But again, the first thing you want to do is determine flows and user paths, which you can write down. The next thing you would want to do is draw out like the certain screens that you'd go with. So like starting off with the home page, then sign in, then take you to this landing page or whatever. And then the next thing is actually using Figma, using the website, and actually creating everything there. So I'm gonna play a video that we used last year that goes over like the basics of Figma and how you can use it to MVP. Do you want to talk? Oh, okay. Or because if you want. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, introduce yourself. Tell them. My voice is kind of broken, so I think it's better to play the video, but okay. It was very cool. I can answer questions. Okay, yeah, at the end you can answer and die for sure. Is it hard to hear?
we have, one thing you try to drag in here all the time. I actually I'm kind of running and kind of drag and drop people's ideas, process, and just up here. Yeah, you see, we took the original idea here. So we have here, we kind of do artwork to kind of do. So, let's for example, if I just wanted to do one here, all I did is I first put A, selected a code, so we put A, and then two logs we have in text, and please, have another text down there. Nothing. And then see it's not like this, so we put that way. One way they go to first, make it left row. Then you see here that one is a little bit and clicking, we're going to just kind of do the rectangle for this. Then we have another thing here for like for it. And then once we have
So that was just a quick intro to Figma. I'm sorry, that must have been like kind of confusing to understand what's happening. But basically, like it's a platform, it's like a website for you to use to that you can draw out like your designs, but you can also start like hashing out like all of your ideas there. And then I don't know if you saw that like Ronek got like a screenshot from the presentation he was using and put it in there. So a lot of people like to just get inspiration off the internet, like, oh, if you want something, if you wanted to look like a certain thing, just add it to that board. Yeah, I don't know if that was like too easy to understand, but like it's like an online like digital whiteboard, I guess would be a good way to describe it, where you can put out your designs and start designing, you're putting together your MVP. Does anyone have any questions, by the way, about like Figma? I really recommend you like checking it out, especially if you're like a CS major or in COGS, or if you want to start getting into that. It'll be a really helpful website for designing things. And for you to get started too, there's a lot of resources online for like learning how to use Figma. They're linked here, and this presentation will be sent out later, but you can go like check those out. And then also to learn more about like how to use Figma, here are some links as well. Oh, and then this last one, Dribble, that's like an online, or that's a website where different people can like post designs that they've made. So it's a good place to go to for like inspiration if you're trying to get like a certain style or trying to make things look a certain way. So that's basically it for the presentation. I have like a final activity that we can do, but we can also just like chill and talk. But for the final activity, we're kind of going to base it off of like the earlier activity, which is like creating your own MVP. But then this time, now that you have your feature list together and the ideas that you had from earlier, you can like start putting together like a rough MVP using Figma or even like Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, or even like pen and paper, like whatever you want to do. And if you guys want to talk about it and start planning that out, go ahead. But if not, if you have to get going, thank you so much for listening to this workshop. If you could please fill out this exit survey, it'd be really helpful. So we're trying to like improve our workshops for the future, especially since we're starting to get things in person now. And then if you have any questions or if you just want to talk, feel free to stay and we'll come answer your questions. But yeah, thank you again for coming to the workshop. And if you want to stay for the activity or to chat, feel free to do so.